when we talk about business continuity and disaster recovery, it's more than just servers and software. We need to think about our people, too.
Hey, Jim. So, a lot of times we don't think of biological viruses and whatnot as impacting cybersecurity, but in some cases there are some, corollaries or impacts there. And I think you were looking into a story about that with respect to coronavirus recently.
Yeah, this Wuhan coronavirus has been making a lot of news lately. The U.S. airlines aren't flying to China anymore for the next few months because of it. And it just brought up another side of cybersecurity that we don't actually touch on too much on the show, so I thought this was a nice opportunity to do that. My friend Johannes Ulrich over at the Internet Storm Center put up this story on the Handler's Diary there. But, we have talked about on the show, and we see fairly frequently with natural disasters and that kind of thing, you'll see the bad guys swooping in and setting up, new domains to try to take donations or use it to spread their malware. And that we're actually seeing some of that happen with this coronavirus thing. But the other thing that it brought to my mind was, business continuity, disaster recovery kinds of things that are probably topics we need to mention here from time to time. So that's the biggest reason why I wanted to throw this out there. A couple of the things that Johannes was highlighting, in business continuity and disaster recovery, we usually spend a lot of time thinking about how do we rebuild our servers in, some disaster recovery site. But this brings up the thought of what about our people? Mm-hmm. If all our key employees are ill, the coronavirus in the U.S., frankly, hasn't been a big deal. There've been, where there've been a dozen cases in the U.S. so far, and no deaths. In the U.S., actually, flu is a bigger thing. The CDC says that there have been 16 million Americans have gotten the flu this year, and 8 or 10,000 have died from it. Yeah. So that that's something to worry about. How are we set up in our enterprises to allow folks to work from home, mm-hmm. so that they're not spreading the flu or the coronavirus or whatever around the workplace? One of the other points that Johannes mentioned that I hadn't really thought about is biometric identification kinds of stuff. Fingerprint scanners, facial recognition. If you're wearing gloves or you got a mask on, those aren't going to work.
Right.
Some hand sanitizers or the stuff that you use to clean the handprint or the fingerprint scanners. Is that going to affect the ability to read the fingerprint or the handprint? Just the kinds of things that I don't have any particular answers for them, but they're things that we need to include in our business continuity and disaster recovery plans. We need to be thinking about not just what happens if a fire or an earthquake takes out a data center, but what happens if a pandemic, puts half of our workforce in the hospital? How do we keep our enterprise running in that case? And so Johannes has links to a couple of things in there, but it was just something that we don't talk about on the show very often, and I thought this was just an opportunity to give that some thought.
Yeah, I think that, I think you made some, valid points in terms of looking at this and deciding, what are the best options for this. And obviously, I think, one of them is obviously, when something like this, especially, talking about the coronavirus is to sort of the whole notion of quarantine people, right? So keeping them at home, but allowing them to continue to work, because a lot of these folks, it's not like they can't work. It's just that you don't want them to be working, just in case they're spreading, right?
Whatever, right?
Exactly. So you want to try to avoid the situation where you have somebody sick that comes in and then all of a sudden the rest of your workforce is sick because they're working, today probably more and more in open environments, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to closed offices where somebody could just lock themselves away. So I think
one sick person in a call center.
Right. Yeah, and you're done. So I think that's important to have that ability to do sort of work from home. And I realize that a lot of companies do have those types of policies. I mean, I haven't looked into sort of what the general notion is across companies within the U.S. about their policies on working from home. But I have to imagine that a lot of them do have that ability to do that, right? And so, are you able to, if you are a company that is kind of borderline where you don't allow it that much, can you pivot quickly when something like this happens, right? Yeah, and get people to hey, I know you guys don't have VPN access, but here, let's get you VPN access and you can start working from home.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that's all those are really valid points, and I actually wouldn't devalue or undervalue having a good emergency communication plan, which is not really a cybersecurity thing. But when you are separated from your workforce, or your workforce is very large and diverse, and I know our company does this, and probably a lot of other companies do as well. If there is some large disaster or something that you have a way for your workers to report in their status that they're okay. Maybe there's a huge hurricane or some natural disaster that comes up the eastern seaboard and you want to make sure your workforce is okay. Having a way for them to check in that, we're okay, I'm okay. And for the management team to know, okay, we haven't heard from Bob, what's going on. Let's try to find out. It just helps you kind of get a better, really quick understanding of the human impact that certain events might be having. And same thing with the pandemic and whatnot. So having those kinds of things established, I think, is a good thing to have, even though you probably don't use them that often, which is a good thing. You don't want large-scale disasters occurring on a regular basis, but it's good to test it too. And I think we do a test at least once or twice a year. To check, we have the Yes OK hotline where we all have to check in, at least once a year or something on a regular basis to test the system and make sure it's working properly. So.
Yep. Yeah.
Anyway, this is, like you said, Jim, it's not something we think about a lot, but there are a lot of bullet points in this article that, I think are valuable for companies to think about and how, a pandemic or other natural disaster like that would, may impact them, and to be prepared for that kind of situation.
Right. And outside of the ones that, as Jim said earlier, outside of the normal ones that you would think about being in the cybersecurity field, the ones that we talk about constantly from week to week, which is, don't be fooled by the phishing campaigns that will come out talking about, here's how to donate to, coronavirus fund or something like that. Those we've talked about very extensively on this show. But I think the other side, which Jim, talked about earlier, which is that whole other side, which is, your actual people and, getting them to actually into the offices and working and continuing, that whole continuation of, being your company actually working, so
right.
I think
you've got the events where you might have a bad event And the things that we talk about a lot are the bad actors trying to capitalize on that by having phishing or other types of lures that they use to trick people into getting malware based on this large-scale event that occurred. But what we're talking about here is the actual impacts of a large-scale event to you and your workforce, not the goofy bad actors trying to capitalize on it, but the
which you'll have to protect against. You'll have to worry about both, right? In these situations,
it's always going to happen. But it's good. Very good thing to consider and think about. So.
Some of these devices, as we've seen over time, tend to run end of life, and when they run end of life, realistically, what you should be doing is replacing the device, not keeping it on the network.